Cool. So I'm here with Gregory, the co-founder at Regen Network, which is built on Cosmos and is also becoming a carbon credit marketplace.
Yeah.
Something really, really cool that I want to learn a lot about. I really started to dig a little bit into it a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, man, this makes so much sense. This is so cool. And we've seen the IBC integration, listing on osmosis. So now it's kind of like all coming together. But now in our pre-conversation just now that we had for almost half an hour, I learned so many things that, you're actually a Cosmos OG and you have been there since very early days and really involved in a lot of things. So that's really cool. But yeah, first things first, thanks for taking the time. How's everything going?
Yeah, it's great to be here, Cryptocito. I'm super stoked, and thanks for kind of pulling the community together around the conversations you've been having. And yeah, really been enjoying getting to just hear all the voices on your show. And yeah, I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think for me, like when I first got into Cosmos, this was actually early this year. And then Jack really took the time to jump on a call and explain me things, give me a bit of context. What really captured my attention was this whole ideology of like collaborating, connecting, building bridges also with other projects, right? It has this multi-chain ideology that resonates a lot with me because the rest of crypto, not like everything, but most of crypto is very tribal, right? They're like, oh my God, this is the only way to go and everything else is a scam, right? You have the Bitcoin maxis, ETH maxis, now Cardano is launching, they have Cardano maxis. So everybody's kind of like in their own little world, right? But
Yeah.
Cosmos kind of like at least envisions to bring it all together and leverage synergies and like in for real, right? So and that's also where I want to start because I love your tweets. I really love your tweets, man. I think you're definitely a must follow on crypto Twitter because also your tweets reflect that vision. And you tweeted something out a few days ago where you basically said to outcorporate the competition. And I think that's an amazing kind of ideology to work with and also resonates again a lot with my vision. So maybe first you can share a bit of a context what you did and kind of like your path that led to crypto and how you view the crypto space in general as a whole.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, yeah, out cooperate the competition. That's sort of our foundational value at Regen Network. And I think, I think the Cosmos ecosystem more broadly as well. Yeah. So my path into crypto was, I mean, maybe everybody's is sort of a long and windy road. I don't know. I was involved very early. I've always been passionate and excited about what I would call regenerative business and regenerative economics. I started my pathway really focused on land use and agriculture and sort of the environmental side of things. So my path was through a discipline called permaculture, where people work to essentially design agro ecosystems, farms, forests, and the interaction between a human business or a human city and the landscape that it's in such a way as the value extraction for the economy, so that we have food and fuel and fiber, clothes on our back, medicine, the whole material economy, so that as we're extracting value, timber, wheat, corn, fish, so we're bringing all of these goods and services from ecosystems into the human economy, to design that in such a way as to actually increase the health of the ecosystems, to create more biodiversity, to increase the health of the soil, to make the water quality better, to make the air quality better through the interaction, and to sort of have a sort of an economic and ecological reciprocity between humans and the ecosystems that we're living in such a way that really mimics, the natural world. So if you look at other species, a lot of other species, like a bear in the forest, the fact that that bear exists, the forest is healthier for it. you know, the as long as there's balances, right? If obviously, so there's a discipline that's focused on this, that it's a global network of people, practitioners, they build, you know, they do all sorts of things. So my early work, my early career was doing what's called permaculture design. And I worked with people and businesses all over the world. And I got very interested in what in that community is referred to as the invisible structures, the economy, the social contract, laws. How do we make agreements with each other as humans in such a way that the outcomes are, you know, the fishery, we have a sustainable fishery, or the farming that's taking place is actually over time increasing soil health. So I did a lot of, I've always been very entrepreneurial. I started a sort of a sequence of businesses, and every business over the course of that trajectory sort of took me deeper into the structure of how to, I mean, really on a journey towards essentially game theory, right? So how do you reinvent the relationship between people so that the two economic actors are no longer trapped in a prisoner's dilemma and are no longer in a zero-sum game where either I cut the forest down or you cut the forest down, and it's going to be one of the two of us, but no matter what, that forest is going to get chopped down. And how do we reinvent that? Because that's a game, that's a social construct, that's not an inevitability, right? We can create games, economic games, you know, and I'm talking about game theory here as like a formal discipline, right? Where you're structuring the set of economic relationships in such a way as profit represents ecological health and the long-term viability of society, of the business that you're in, of your community. And so I got very interested in success. You know, I had a chocolate business that was doing direct trade and connecting people with farmers and really actively purchasing from communities that were stewarding biodiversity and regenerating the landscape through, you know, farming cacao, right, which makes this amazing product. Side note, at some point, expect to see a cacao currency on Regen Ledger. It'll happen. So, and then I had this business, I sort of translated that and my permaculture design into a business called Genesis International, where we're working with international companies doing supply chain transformation. So we were transforming companies so that the impact they're having by purchasing goods from farmers around the world was moving towards positive climate outcomes, you know, increased wages, just like how do you create, and a lot of people have good intentions. And so we did pretty well as a business, but I have to say what I learned was the structural incentives of the economy, the way that fiat money bakes in incentives and what it's backed by, the way that the traditional financial system operates, it really pushes everyone, despite their good intentions, into a set of relationships that are zero sum and end up with negative externalities like soil depletion and pollution. And that's just the structural nature of the economy. And there's nothing inevitable about that. That's a set of choices. That's a set of choices about what we value, market preferences, pricing preferences. So, you know, in 2017, I had my first son, and I was taking a paternity leave from my business, and the crypto bull markets started, and I had some ETH and I had some Bitcoin, and I was like sitting there with my son, and I was watching the markets go. And through my years, I had some connections with people who had taken courses from colleagues of mine who were like pretty deep in the Ethereum space. And yeah, these conversations started around, I wrote a book in 2012 called Regenerative Enterprise, which was sort of a manifesto of how these ideas express themselves, that became, I guess, a bit of a cult classic in those circles. Like, it was used a lot for education and other things. And anyway, people it's like the crypto community started like knocking on my door, and I was watching markets and I was knocking on their door, and this conversation started flourishing around what does it look like to really address systemically and try to create sort of an accounting system and an economic system that values positive externalities, public goods, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, and just really like, what do we need? What's what's the digital infrastructure that would make that possible? And out of that exploration and that conversation was born the Regen Network white paper, was born a set of relationships that included the Cosmos community. And very early on, we recognized that a sovereign blockchain that was governed by the stakeholders who need to create and maintain consensus about an ecological ledgering system really needed to have its own governance and its own performance, and that there were technical gaps, I guess, in Ethereum as a layer 1 solution. So very early, we were very, very early Tendermint users and supporters, and it just resonated very deeply with what we felt was needed for the domain there. So that's, I mean, that's a little bit of the origin story, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you definitely have deep industry knowledge, and I think that's also something that is lacking sometimes in crypto. You know, with all these meme coins and those hype narratives that are coming and going. But I think we're at a point now in crypto where we actually have real world demand and also product market fit, where you can actually deploy crypto or blockchain solutions in the real world that makes sense, right? And I think what we're seeing now with this whole energy debate and Bitcoin mining, and like it raises awareness of the environmental issues, carbon neutrality, and those kind of things in general, right? So now I think the big narrative now could actually be environment and those kind of things. But what would you say in that context? What would you say to somebody who now listens to this, is maybe new to crypto, has heard about it from 2017, then 2 years nothing, and now again, and now hears that Tesla accepts Bitcoin, and then they don't accept it because they're spending too much energy in the mining and electricity? What would you say to somebody who comes like, how does this match up? How do you want to save the environment with crypto? Like there's this kind of like disconnect, right?
It's a narrative disconnect. Well, first off, I would say, like, we could talk about Bitcoin and energy consumption. I'm happy to talk about that. I think it's an important topic to actually sort of engage with head on. I would just note for everybody, one of the most beautiful things about Tendermint, Byzantine fault tolerant proof of stake consensus, and the Cosmos SDK approach to building application specific or domain specific blockchains is it's enormously energy efficient. You're like Regen Network to create a global ecological ledger with nodes distributed all over the planet. We're talking, we're a rounding error. The Cosmos Hub is a rounding error on a day's energy use of Ethereum. We're like less than an hour of proof of work consensus. I mean, less than an hour of those networks per year. So it's not even, it's like, so there are efficient ways, and I want to say, like, I'm not a proof of stake maximalist either. There's a role for proof of work. There are reasons why you might want to have that enormously energy inefficient, enormously wasteful competition between machines to generate consensus. And the public goods that are produced by proof of work arguably are worth it. Like, they're arguably, to have a globally scarce store of value and peer-to-peer sort of currency system without an empire backing it, without it being the petrodollar, without it being without the US military having to sort of enforce its hegemony and control over petroleum resources, arguably that's worth a lot of energy. Arguably it's worth a lot of energy to maintain that kind of global consensus around a store of value for economic reasons. And Bitcoin, without Bitcoin and without that functionality, you know, none of the rest of the innovation in crypto would be here, right? And so I just want to like shout out, you know, in a way, I think the Cosmos ecosystem is kind of full of, you know, closet Bitcoin maxis. A lot of us really respect Bitcoin and its role in the ecosystem. And also, like, look, we're all building public proof of stake, energy efficient, you know, from like a Bitcoiner perspective, like shitcoin machines. And I think that's nonsense. Like, you know, people, there is no one chain to rule them all. There's no one currency to rule them all. The power of the blockchain is for people to create consensus about what they need to create consensus about. And there are some things that need global consensus. And there are other things that need local consensus. There are some things that require your community, like a municipality or a cooperative in a neighborhood or an insurance, you know, an insurance company to maintain transparent state around a ledger and an accounting system and governance. And there are other things that require those to compile into more global ledgering systems, right? And there's both. It's like it requires, you know, small consensus and big consensus for this vision of an economy driven by voluntary association and an economy that is not sort of controlled by the oligarchy. And in order for all of that to exist, there's a couple of things that need to be true. One of the things that needs to be true is that the technology or the capability for people to like to generate a state machine or a blockchain that represents a unit of account and a transparent ledger of, you know, addresses sending from one place to another and sort of security and data integrity around that. It needs to be really easy to do that. Like, you need to be able to just spin that up, because then people will only, because then the reality that value is a social construct that we're choosing together to imbue a unit of account and say that this is valuable is just, it's startlingly and stunningly clear that if those communities that are maintaining those units of account are not doing so in integrity, you know, if it's just a hype machine, if it's just a Ponzi scheme, and that, you know, people won't put value into it. And so, you know, money exists because humans choose to make it valuable. This whole concept of like gold is only valuable because we put value into it. There's nothing intrinsically valuable about gold. It just has a long history of people choosing to imbue it with value. There's nothing valuable about Bitcoin except for that we choose to value certain attributes. Okay, so if we all sort of understand the social, like, I think that that's called social constructivism in terms of monetary theory. That's an idea. There's a well-worn path in academia around that as an economic theory, and I certainly believe it. I think Bucky and Jay, as founders of Cosmos, both believe that. You know, I know Jack does. I've seen him tweeting about, you know, money is a meme. It's a meme. All money is a meme coin. All of it. The US dollar is a meme coin. It's just, what are the values? What is the social, what are the values and the agreements that come along with your money? You know, and the US dollar, the agreements, there are good things about the US dollar and the US economy. There's good things about the American democratic experiment. There's good things about the democracy. There's good things, you know, and it's time to move on. Not necessarily in a way, I don't believe, that destroys that system, but that creates more flexibility and creates more detailed accounting for value and more ability from, you know, I think one of Jaquan's, and I'll stop ranting in a second, but one of Jaquan's founding ideas around Cosmos was that there would be a competition between monies, that there actually has to be a world in which different units of account, stores of value, staking tokens that could represent those, but also represent governance and inclusion around the sort of the monetary infrastructure of a group of people, that there actually needs to be diversity of approach and a competition between them, so that we as citizens and community members as humans get to choose. What do we want to put our energy into? What unit of account do we want to use? Where do we want to store our value? There actually has to be a competition around that so that it works well. And I think that's what you see. That's one of the positive things. I mean, crypto can be overwhelming and crazy, and there's Ponzi schemes, and there's, people are getting rugged all the time, and it's moving like 1,000 miles a minute. But the positive side of that, the positive attributes, which I really believe in, is that we're creating a system right now. We're seeing a competition between different money systems be born, and we're creating a scenario, an economy, where businesses and countries and individuals, all of these nested layers of social organization, from a family group, individual family group, community, nation state, we get to choose what money system we think is going to work best. And that kind of competition is really healthy.
Yeah, and I think it's also about narratives in the end of the day, right? Like people trust different thought leaders eventually, right? I guess all of Peter Schiff's followers would now shake their heads and say, "Oh my God, he doesn't understand money." And I think it's also about like what narrative
they can believe that, and they can be like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, this is like the beauty of the Cosmos vision, is those people can say, because of historical reasons and because gold has for so long maintained this position, that we choose that as our store of value. And I'm just like, more power to you guys. That's great. And what if I want to store, and this gets to Regen Network, what if I want my store of value to be ecological health? What if I want a world in which, the biodiversity and the beauty of a landscape is what I choose to create the basic unit of account for storing value? And I want that. That's what I want. I want my kids to live in a world in which the value of money and, storing it and exchanging it has a positive relationship with the health of the Amazon rainforest and the health of the Great Barrier Reef and the health of our farming systems. And so I want people who get rich to have an automatic positive relationship with that. Not like, hey, I'm going to go make my money by mining gold and creating strip mines and destroying rivers with acid, that's, because acid extraction of the gold and the copper, which is how that happens, so that we can have our gold for money or these other things. Or, nor do I really want a world in which everybody's like, hey, we have to build crazy, Bitcoin mining systems that just burn massive amounts of energy in order for us to generate like a socially acceptable store of value. I want what people have to do is, to generate a socially acceptable store of value and to get rich and to maintain their wealth intergenerationally. I want there to be a world in which the stewardship of that forest outside is what you have to do. That's work. There's just as much of opportunity of proof of work, proof of regeneration, proof of stewardship. It's hard to do. It creates scarcity. You have to put attention to it. You can monitor it. You can, and this is where we get to what is Regen Network and what are we doing? We're creating a global ecological ledgering system that allows there to be a social, a consensus around, is that forest there? Is it healthier than it was before? And, how do we value that? Right? And what value does it produce? And then feed up into this DeFi ecosystem that's emerging as financial instruments as something that can be collateral in, or that can be LP'd. And so, what we're building right now in our go-to-market strategy is a decentralized carbon exchange, but not just a carbon exchange where we're pulling in like old carbon credits off the market, which is, I think, what basically everybody else is doing. We're creating an integrated system where who said what about where, the construct of that value, right? How do you verify it? The Oracle problem. How does that information get on chain? Who is creating a digital signature? The scientist, the farmer, the auditing body, that they're participating in the minting of that token, which, in our case, they're basically NFTs, where a group of people are participating in minting an NFT that's a unique attestation of the health of that forest or the health of that farm, that contains the detailed scientific consensus about the carbon reality, how much carbon has been sequestered into that ecosystem and is being held. And, we get into all sorts of geeky sort of science on that level, but that's how our society chooses to imbue that value and to monitor that value, right? That's how we create consensus about that. And so, Regen Ledger is very focused. Our network and community and the blockchain, the layer 1 blockchain that we use, is very focused on that chain of events that catalyzes minting and then brings that up to be able to be traded, retired, or used as an asset.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. I like that concept, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And also what you said earlier about basically the innovation of blockchain technology as itself, right? Basically elevating from this double entry accounting to a triple entry accounting model, right? Where you have a publicly verifiable, trustworthy kind of like ledger that everybody can see, nobody can modify, and everybody owns, right? And I think that's kind of like the whole, at least in my world, that's how I view crypto in general. That's how I view Bitcoin. Bitcoin is probably right now a bit static, and maybe in the long term good at that store of value kind of thing, because of the built-in game theory with the scarcity, and also with the mining process and all this kind of things, because you actually have to have high transaction fees in order to incentivize miners to provide security, which makes it unspendable for the people, right? So it's kind of like this ultimate money and store of value. But I think what you got into is basically Tendermint as an alternative that fixes all the hardware issues, that fixes also the scalability issues. And I think Jake Kwan has done amazing work. I had Ethan on my channel as well, the second co-founder, as you also said, of Cosmos. And he also said, man, like, it's incredible that Jay recognized this in 2014, right? Like 2014, right?
Way
like,
back then, Jake Kwan saw he saw the beauty of Bitcoin and the limitations of Bitcoin and the demand that was this demand that's needed. And the other thing that I think Jay and Bucky, Ethan, as his sort of like first disciple, and then a visionary in his own right, saw, which resonated with me, and what drew me in the early days, and so like I was a participant in the crowdfund of Cosmos back in early 2017, and I've been in the community ever since, right? We've been building with Tendermint, we've been partnering, our team maintains the Cosmos SDK, we're building a zone, we're Cosmos maximalists. And what that means is, what's the right tool, what's the right technology, what are the right rules for the community of stakeholders that need to come together around to maintain the state that there's consensus around. So if that's Ethereum as a settlement layer, if that's Bitcoin as a settlement layer, like, I support that. If that's Solana doing high transaction stuff, or if that's Cardano. I mean, I doubt that that's a reality that we actually live in, but if it is, like, hey, if they pull it off and they manage to get out of the sort of like the academic and into the reality of building stuff, that's awesome. The beauty that Jaquan and Ethan gifted everybody is this pragmatism around what does a community need to maintain trustless consensus around whatever the unit of account or the governance rules, and to create scalability through interoperability, so that my community and your community can seamlessly interoperate, but have the different rules that respect what we need. And that, you know, taking a little bit of a geeky, you know, academic side, you know, side road for a moment, that concept in my world is called cosmolocalism, which comes from sort of the peer-to-peer world around how do you reconcile this. You know, you see this in Cosmos. Bucky, for instance, and Jay, I think they're like localists. They want community currencies and local, you know, we want a world in which, you know, a municipality or a community has the power to create its own money and to manage itself according to its local needs, but also in a way that relates to and is interoperable with the next layer up. You know, and like, and in my worldview, that's a bioregion. That's like the natural world gives us watersheds and climate zones, and we need to organize ourselves in relationship to that, because we live on this beautiful planet Earth that we as humans also need to care for, because that planet cares for us, and we are completely dependent on the health of the planet for our health. And so our societies have to recognize that. And a society that lives in Portugal is going to have different demands than a society that lives in the Amazon. That's going to have different demands from a society that lives in the Sahara or lives on the Indian subcontinent. Each of those societies has to have a different set of, you know, rules and relationships with the natural world, and therefore different units of account and economic systems that actually account for that relationship. And that, like, there is no other crypto community other than Cosmos that understands that sovereignty of those communities to determine those rules around their monetary and financial reality, that's like the base level of human agreement with one another about how we live in the world. You don't get deeper. That's like the root protocol, our money. It's the root protocol. And without the open source and freely available tools for us as humans to determine, experiment, iterate, evolve, and create consensus around that like root level of social agreement of our monetary tools and instruments, everything else is just, you know, as we say in the States, peeing into the wind. It's just all like, it's just all whatever. We won't get there without understanding the need to innovate and create freedom of innovation for all of us as humans to take control and sovereignty of our money system and money systems, the plurality and the polyculture. And, you know, I'm inspired by, as I was mentioning earlier in the podcast, permaculture, agroecology, these concepts that are born out of an ecologist worldview, where we look at the greater than human world, where we look at living systems, we look at the Great Barrier Reef and the Amazon forest, and we ask, wow, what is the brilliant organizing principles of these ecosystems that have existed for millions of years? And they get ever more complex. They get ever more beautiful. There's more and more novel expressions of life. And what do we need to learn from that? And one of the things that we need to learn is diversity of approach, having a competition between different approaches in which we cooperate to create the maximum diversity of approaches. And that's what Cosmos does, right? As an ecosystem, we cooperate to make it possible for anyone to, as cheaply as possible, express their social or ecological or economic rule set into the world, so that that can become, you know, in a game theoretical perspective, a Schelling point where the economy entrains on the most well adapted, the most competitive set of rules or feature set, and that becomes what's actually the organizing principle around everything else. We're cooperating, you know, the Akash and Regen Network and Osmosis and the Cosmos Hub and, you know, I mean, even Thorchain and SIFchain and, you know, Sentinel, everybody, all of us who are in this, we're cooperating, we're competing, we're in this beautiful open source relationship where we're making it cheaper and easier every month, month after month after month, every year, year after year after year, for humans to come together and create and iterate and experiment on creating the right size, scale, and rule set for a, you know, a blockchain and an expression of value to work, right? And we at Regen Network, we're focused on the belief that this technology needs to reconnect us with the health of the biosphere and with the health of our local ecosystems, and that should be where we base economic value in exchange from, and that there has to be a relationship there. And that puts us in this amazing position to be iterating on sort of the ESG and voluntary and compliance carbon markets, which is a booming business, trillions of dollars being exchanged soon, and all this stuff. That's great. That's our traction. But the ethos and the idea here is to really like reinvent the economics to realign short-term profit with long-term ecological health.
And so you already briefly touched upon this earlier regarding the Oracle problem, kind of like in this whole concept, right? Because I understand, like, once you have everything on the chain, it's easy to transfer, it's easy to verify, right?
Yeah.
But especially as we're dealing in this kind of like environmental sphere, right? There's you need to measure things, right? You need to measure emissions, you need to measure like everything. So how do you do that? Are you using like publicly available satellite data, or are you building your own IoT devices? Or that's like the main question I had when I learned about what Regen is. Like, how do you get this on chain?
Well, the first step is to understand that even just getting sort of like who said what about where, using what data and what methodology up on chain makes auditing a claim and doing things like curating claims or staking claims so that people have skin in the game around that claim much more efficient and much easier. So even just using like the old school way of like, this trusted expert said this about this place, but getting that out of a PDF and off of a, you know, centralized database and up into a public ledgering system has this enormous efficiency gain and transforms the way that things work. So even that is a positive step. Now, we're definitely not stopping there. We are building tools to use publicly available satellite data sets to monitor, to do real-time monitoring of claims. So if you have a carbon credit that claims to be coming from the Amazon, you know, you can ask, where is it claiming to come from? And you can audit that using, publicly available data. And you can say, yep, there is a forest that according to this landscape classification and this algorithm matches that. And you can do that, you know, the way we're building this is all in evolution, but we're driving towards that happening in real time for basically as close to free as possible. So it's, you know, you're just paying for the computation basically to make that happen on chain. So it's just like, boom, okay, it checks out. So real-time publicly available satellite information is essential. We are also, paying attention to and in partnership conversations with IoT providers. I think it sort of like it all starts to move in that direction, but I just want to emphasize it doesn't need to. It's like this all works with humans providing expert humans, scientists who have trained. There's a way to create sort of a decentralized intersubjective landscape where people like this group and that group can cross-check in order to create a token. And that all has to do with the token minting logic and how we choose, like what's the level of rigor that we choose to associate with a claim and why. And so in certain cases, I believe that you want less rigor. You want to basically just be like, that guy said it's true and it's up on chain. And that's all there is. That's like all there is. And it should be kind of frictionless in that way. But that asset's not going to be worth a lot on a big open market because people are going to be like, I don't know that guy. And there's no reputation there. But in a local context, maybe I do know that guy. And maybe I'm like, that's enough for me, right? That's enough for me to have that asset be worth something and to have it be moving. Whereas as you get farther and farther from a social relationship, you need more and more layers of what I would call, in a geeky way, intersubjective, or like more different people, different data sets, AI, satellite data are basically coming in and saying like, this checks out. This is something that we agree with is within the bounds of what's being claimed, right? And so the more specific you make a claim, the more precise you make a claim, the harder it is to defend. And the more detailed data you need, and the more different people you need checking it out, right? And so I think you see over time this Oracle system, this decentralized Oracle system evolving to be more and more precise and more accurate at lower and lower cost. But at the moment, we work with what we have. And so those are sort of small strides with bringing in real time, wow, we now have real time publicly available satellite information that refreshes every week, thanks to the European Space Agency, right? And the Sentinel-2 data set. And they have launched these satellites up into orbit, and they take high enough resolution images and make that available to the world so that anybody who knows what they're doing can go pull that data and can use it to audit a claim or can attach it to create a claim. And then we have private data sets. And so you can use those same private data sets to audit the public data set if you want, right? If you want, you can create, in our sort of, I guess, ontology of minting, you could create a credit class that requires a specific third party to go check it out. We trust that party. So like a government or a corporation could say, we only accept credits that third party specifically has gone and checked, or that group of third parties has gone and checked out. So sort of what we want to do is create a flexible system in which the level of rigor that the world needs for an asset to have value is the level of rigor that the market will choose. And we don't want to overdo that, right? Because then it gets too expensive. And we don't want to underdo it because then there's not trust, right? In the value of the asset. So just like getting it just right, and at the moment means matching the existing carbon markets and how they work and how their auditing and claims works, and making that more efficient and cheaper so that it's easier to bring more accurate and precise claims up onto the blockchain and make it very cheap to audit. That's where we're at right now. We're sort of like, hey, this is how the existing world does it. Here's how carbon credits work. And we can make that more efficient and cheaper, and we can get assets up onto the blockchain more effectively than the old incumbent system, right? And if people want, they can amp up that level of rigor kind of like as crazy as you want to go. right? Or they can reduce that level of rigor so it's just some dude who said it, right? And you know, we can create market conditions where that can kind of compete, and we can create price discovery around not just the level of rigor as I'm describing of those assets, but also the quality of those credits. Like how many co-benefits, how many societal co-benefits are related to that carbon credit? You know, does it include biodiversity and water quality or flood risk mitigation or all of these other things that having a healthy ecosystem actually creates as positive externalities for our society? All of that can become part of the price discovery in these assets that are trading. So you can say, does a soil carbon credit versus a avoided deforestation credit in the Amazon versus a blue carbon mangrove credit versus a energy efficiency credit, what are like how much are these worth, like relative to one another? Maybe there's more uncertainty on one than the other, so that creates a premium, but maybe the other one creates more positive externalities like flood risk mitigation, right? Which has this big downstream economic effect that reduces your insurance premium. So it's worth more, right? There's a way to leverage price discovery and market mechanisms to drive value into the places that as society we need there to be value. Like we need a world in which that tree standing in the Amazon is actually worth more in place, creating the ecosystem services that it does, than it is cut down and turned into toilet paper. We just have to have that price signaling aligned with our societal health. You know, it's just, we have to do that.
Yeah. And can you talk about maybe if you want pick one specific case study of like partners that you have? I think on your website, at least it says that you have some farms already onboarded in Australia, but also in the US. And so can you explain like how you got in contact with these farms? Are you like, did they know about Regen for many years, or how did they get in touch with you? And what are you guys doing with them? Like, are they kind of like already fully onboarded and already have some tangible benefits like you were just describing, also maybe like byproducts that you discovered only after working together with them? So can you just talk about maybe one case study and give us insights on how that works and how it goes?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest case study I think that's worth mentioning here is we ran a pilot, and it took took a while to sort of bring together a remote sensing. You know, we did some very deep science work that is like industry leading around using remote sensing to monitor soil health and translate that using on the ground soil sampling and sort of combining these two data sets and using some machine learning in order to create an accurate enough model of soil health to create a carbon credit in Australia, in New South Wales, Australia, with holistically managed grazing. So a little bit of a side story. So cattle and other ungulates, large animals that move across landscapes that you think of like bison herds or the giant herds on the steppes of Eurasia, or these animals moving across landscapes, when they're working in a way that mimics their natural role in the ecosystem, and they're eating grass and then they're pooping and then they're moving on, they're not staying in the same place. When animals are moving across landscapes like that, they actually sequester, the plants are drawing down carbon, and then the animals are eating that, and then they're pooping. And then if they leave for long enough, every year you basically are building a layer of soil, and in that soil is carbon. And so year after year, these natural farming systems, ranching systems that mimic that cycle of animals moving across the landscape and letting the ecosystem regenerate fully before they come back and graze again, every year they build a little bit more carbon, right? And if you can monitor and measure that and quantify it, you can create an accounting system for that carbon coming out of the atmosphere and being turned into soil, right? And that creates a carbon credit. And in this case, in New South Wales, we ran a pilot with a set of 3 different ranches, and Microsoft actually purchased all of those carbon credits that we helped create and get up onto the blockchain and kind of create the auditing system. So Microsoft purchased over 100,000 of those credits from those farmers. And in our system, only in the old carbon market system, the average price, the average amount of money that gets to a land steward for producing those carbon credits is only 20% of the value. So if a carbon credit costs $10, in this case, I think these carbon credits cost like just under $13. I think the carbon markets are booming right now. So if they were to sell in this moment, this happened like a year ago, if they were to sell in this moment, they would be $20 at least. So the carbon credit markets are on a bull run right now. But anyway, in the normal system, if you're using the old set of technology and the old registry systems, only 20 cents on the dollar makes it to the farmer. In the way that we did this, 80 cents on the dollar went to the farmer, and that other 20 cents on the dollar was distributed to the people doing the monitoring and reporting and verification and minting. So we just created a much more efficient flow to get those credits to market. And those farmers, they basically got this big fat paycheck for the outcome of that soil carbon being built up year after year, that they had adopted these grazing strategies because it creates a healthier farm, and it also creates a public good. It creates this positive externality that there's carbon being pulled out of the atmosphere where it was put by industry and being put into the soil, right? And so that public good, the difference between what, if they weren't managing holistically and they weren't, you know, if they just had those cattle out like everybody has, right? And they were just doing it in the way that happens when people aren't consciously working to mimic the natural system in such a way as to sequester carbon back into the soil, that carbon wouldn't have been sequestered there. And so the difference between what would have happened if they weren't managing using these practices and what did happen because they were managing with those practices is the carbon credit that was purchased by Microsoft and retired as part of their carbon abatement and plan. And I just want to take a quick, people may be thinking, oh, this is sort of like corporations are just doing this for PR, or what, just sort of like a fuzzy, sort of like it's a fuzzy thing. I just want to note that the Bank of England, Swiss reinsurance, and beyond, many large lending institutions and insurance institutions have basically said, corporations that do not have a plausible plan to bring themselves to net zero by 2050 will not get insured. They will not get lent money. They do not have access to capital. They're going to go out of business. This is not compliance markets. This is not the government regulating things. This is capital assessing the risk of climate change according to science and saying, we're not going to lend to you because our lending to you or our investment in you is too risky. And therefore, unless you have a plausible plan to mitigate your carbon emissions and get your business to net neutral or carbon negative, you don't get any money, right? That shift of definition of fiduciary, where corporate leadership, chief financial officers, CEOs are responsible for taking their businesses or their investment portfolios to carbon neutral or carbon negative. That is now the state of the world. That's the new state of the world, right? Even the oil, like the Dutch government sued Shell, right? And they basically said your corporate charter will be revoked if you don't become carbon neutral on a time frame. So just like the world of today is different from the world of 2 years ago, in which climate accounting, all of this stuff was like, oh, that would be nice. And it's just like, it's kind of voluntary and it might happen. Microsoft is taking leadership here because as a company, they see both the opportunity of taking leadership, right? And the demand that if they don't actually offset all of their carbon, and the same is true for all the big tech companies, everybody, if they don't take responsibility for offsetting their carbon, they will go out of business. It's that simple. It's like now we've gotten to the stage that this is clear-cut business logic, that people, corporations, investors, capitalists are basically saying, if we don't, count carbon on our balance sheet, just like a liability, it's now a liability on the balance sheet, and offset that liability, we will go out of business because the balance sheet won't pencil. It is now no longer an externality. It's been internalized, right? And so therefore, Regen Network is in this beautiful position. I mean, when we started, that wasn't true. When we started, it was before this reality existed that financial decision makers had woken up to this understanding that carbon has to be accounted on the balance sheet of all of these companies and nation states. It was still an argument. People are still resistant. That's no longer true. People are looking, there's more demand for these carbon assets like that New South Wales, Australia, than we can keep up with as a network. And we're still building out the system. I just want to let everybody know, in a month or so, we're going to go through a network upgrade to get the credit module and credits up on chain and make it possible to be minting and have all of this happening. We're still not quite there yet. So we're doing a final audit on that technology. Then there's going to be a network upgrade, and we're doing successive network upgrades over the next 18 months or even 2 years, where our network is evolving to meet the needs of that emerging demand, so that there is public transparency, market efficiency, price discovery, and auditability of all of these claims and assets to meet that growing demand, and to meet it also for the crypto industry. Another really exciting pilot is we offset F2 pool, which is the world's biggest Bitcoin staking pool, in a pilot. So they bought credits from us, and we've been in a industry working group with them around creating basically green Bitcoin and other like DeFi financial instruments that bake in these environmental assets, so that Bitcoin becomes even more defensible as a store of value, so that this sort of like whole ESG energy usage is not an issue, because you can point to it and say, actually, this unit of Bitcoin did more good in the world than it did negative. So even understanding and accounting for that energy use, this Bitcoin is valuable. And the beauty of, what we were referring to in this earlier phase of the conversation is the intersection between sort of the traditional market demand for these carbon assets and the opportunity for DeFi and blockchain and Web 3.0 to innovate faster, create better tools, and ensure that this emerging climate finance economy is natively decentralized and is governed by the people. And this is our golden opportunity. This is the moment where we, the people, get to transform the monetary and financial systems, not only to account for positive and negative externalities and the health of the world, but to actually take control over finance from the incumbent financial industry in a way that's cooperative. There doesn't need to be a war. This is simply better tools, better technology, better governance, interfacing with that incumbent world and transforming it, composting it and turning it back into something that serves the people, and in some way is kind of this hybrid vision between like classical Austrian economics and, I don't know, maybe even like Marx. It's like the people controlling the means of production, with market efficiency. It's like this weird reconciliation between different philosophies and ideologies where we're like, yeah, we're going to account for the positive and negative externalities, and we're going to create a financial system that actually reflects that and is governed by the people, by workers, by families, by individuals, by governments. Like, we get to secure the proof of stake networks that run this system. Like, that's what we get to do. And the early adopters, people who are the validators and delegators and investors, the millennial generation, Gen Z, Gen X, that's leading the DeFi revolution and the blockchain revolution and the NFT revolution, we're like at the ground floor of this new flourishing, revolution at the root layer of our societal logic of reinventing money. So, I couldn't be more amped and excited and stoked about it all.
I hear your excitement, and I think, the whole kind of like structure that we're building with the crypto economy is also that we're all operating in DAO ecosystems, right? Like decentralized autonomous organizations, and if we can connect all these through something like IBC or some other bridging protocols, I think that's a real army of people, that are all kind of like part of it, right? They all have a voice in the network and even cross networks. So I think that's, at least for me, very, very exciting stuff. And I think now it's also about just bringing awareness to the people that crypto is not just about speculating on coin prices and getting rich quick, right? Sure, we're all excited if Regen does 100x or Atom goes to $1,000, right? Sure, that would be cool. I hold Atom, please go to the moon. But I think in the long run, it touches upon so much more. And what you described is like the big grand vision, and also this shot that we have, how crypto and how blockchain or how even Cosmos fixes one of the main challenges that we had, I think, at least from in the environmental industry, right? Because also the financial incentives have been misaligned, right? Like farmers, they're not getting anything out of this. If you get 20 cents on the dollar, like why would I even bother to find ways to have more carbon credits, right? And to generate
exactly.
that. But if you just change that narrative, and now suddenly the farmers have big incentives because they're making money with it, now you're actually fundamentally changing this and resolving the problem by its root. And I think that's definitely exciting. And I would also love to see more, coming from that side. But yeah.
Before we go, I want to point out this this DAO.
Yeah.
The power of governance and the power of DAOs, and how IBC, like, let's just call out IBC. It is a transformative technology, creating sovereign blockchains that are essentially DAOs and then governed by this like DAOs within DAOs,
right?
Humans or AI, whatever, the agents that govern a system, compiling that at different layers. Just like, let's walk through climate accounting and carbon markets right now. So carbon is a global issue. The excess of atmospheric carbon and all environmental issues are global issues. And we're still in a world in which there's a hole in the ozone. We don't talk about that much, but that exists, right? We're still in a world in which there's plastic pollution in the oceans. These things are things we have to solve as a global community, but action is always local, right? Regeneration and stewardship happens in your backyard. It happens locally. It happens with your community, but it's a global issue. It's local and global at the same time. And therefore, we have to have local DAOs. We need to empower indigenous people in the Amazon to be able to control the ecological and social goods and the local currencies and their relationship with the global economy in such a way as their incentives are aligned with continuing the lineage of stewardship of living in and preserving the most biodiverse, like the heart of the planet. Right, the Amazon is the hydrological pump. It keeps all of these things moving. There's people who have been stewarding the Amazon for 50,000 plus years in a way that their culture is intimately related to the biodiversity, the most biodiverse place on the planet in a terrestrial ecosystem that provides the hydrological pump for the whole atmosphere to keep, without the Amazon, the Gulf Stream ceases to exist. Without the Gulf Stream existing, Europe is in an ice age. Just full stop. It's just that's how the world works, right? And so if the life way of those indigenous people can be incentivized, and if those indigenous people can have DAOs that have equal stake and equal voice as the UN or Exxon or the United States or Portugal or the Cosmos Hub, we create the right DAO topology to align incentives, right? And so at Regen Network, we have this program called the Community Staking DAO program, where 30% of all of the staking tokens are set aside and stewarded by the foundation to endow groups like indigenous peoples in the Amazon, farmers in the Midwest of the United States, smallholder farmers in Europe, science groups internationally, all the stakeholders who are not going to speculate, who are not going to participate in the kind of at the moment crazy fervor of crypto excitement where we're buying and speculating on a network and bootstrapping it and putting all this work, but they're foundational members, like they're doing the work, they're stewarding the landscapes, they're building the science methodologies. They have to be in the foundational layer of things. They need to have a financial upside, they need to have a governance say. And so a huge part of the theory of Regen Network is that those people need to have governance stake and financial upside in this whole system working and being born. And there needs to be a global ecological ledgering system in which an Amazonian tribe is a peer with the UN intergovernmental body of climate change. They're peers. They are on equal footing in the ledger. That's how we align incentives. And that, as you're mentioning DAOs and IBC, that becomes possible only really through IBC. So imagine if the UN wants to keep their own global climate accounting system, and they will. And that has to be public and has to be transparent, but it has to be managed by experts. So if the IPCC, which recently published this amazing report, starts publishing and creating a scientific, ecological carbon accounting system using the Cosmos SDK, and an indigenous tribe in the Amazon has a universal basic income mutual credit system that's tied to the health of their forest, which has a smart contract referencing publicly available data that allows them to be paid by the world to steward their landscape and account for that carbon and transact via IBC. Those two groups have their own sovereign governance logic. They have their own institutional capability, and they can interoperate in a way that actually creates the global transparency that we as a society needs, right? And the beautiful thing about Cosmos and Regen Network is, hey, if those two groups, if Regen Ledger is efficient and effective and clearly the place for both of those two groups to use as a ecological settlement layer, that's great. But if we're not effective enough as a DAO, as a domain-specific blockchain, both of those two groups can interoperate with Regen Ledger as a DEX, or Regen Ledger as a registry, or Regen Ledger as a blockchain with their own Cosmos SDK blockchain via IBC. They can govern, the nested DAO governance of a blockchain governing another blockchain, of the topology of the Internet of blockchains that's going to emerge in this interconnected layer one. It is so transformative and so much different than the network topology that the Ethereum community conceptualizes as, layer one and layer two and side chains and optimistic. All of that technology gets brought in and reinvented in the Cosmos Internet of Blockchains in such a way as, I believe, to really be able to empower groups as disparate as indigenous people in the Amazon and the IPCC Commission and corporations and citizens to actually create the right global accounting system without forcing people into what essentially is a centralized logic of one chain to rule them all, or one settlement system to rule them all. So we can have that nested accounting, and we can have that global relationship with the cosmo-local. We can have a cosmopolitan, diverse planetary system without it being one world government. We can have climate accounting without it being the Davos crowd and like some global elite that's imposing it on people. We can have a transformation of our economy that's driven from the grassroots up. And that's what we have to do. It's like we're at a stage in global weirding and planetary evolution where we're in a post-truth world. It's hyper normalized. The world is crazy. We don't necessarily know up from down. So we have to take responsibility to account for who is saying what about where, when, why, backing it up in what way, where we have integrity and reputation and markets that are transparent and secure and private, the right mix of privacy and public. And that's, that's why I believe that, your listeners have been listening to Jack and Bucky and, all of the great people in the Cosmos ecosystem talk about why we're passionate and why we're building things and what's happening. All of us are trying to create that world together. And we all have a different slice of it. We're doing the ecological accounting piece. Akash is doing a decentralized cloud. The Cosmos Hub is the routing system and the DEX for the whole ecosystem. Osmosis is innovating and creating this amazing marketplace. Everybody has a little bit of a different slice, but at the end of the day, we're all working together on the same open source code, leveraging inter-blockchain communication protocol to create this transformation, of society, of business, of our monetary systems with this technology.
Yeah, and I love also how all of you bring your own kind of like background and expertise, right? That you with your environmental and agriculture background, and then everybody has like, Ethan, I think he's very interested in consensus logics and also monetary systems and policies. And like you're all kind of like, you have this different background. I think collectively, it helps to build probably one of the best protocols out there in terms of like connecting networks and open source and open ledgers as well. And I also like the example that you brought up with the indigenous people in the Amazon, especially because you're not just talking about like saving the environment, right? You're also talking about protecting people, protecting heritage, protecting culture, right? I know today in Brazil, there's hundreds of thousands of tribes that are literally being eliminated and nobody even is fully aware of that. There's a couple of petitions to protect at least some tribes. There's still hope there, but we can't just wait for Bolsonaro to just leave and another president to come who is suddenly very interested in saving the Amazon, right? I think it makes sense to just fundamentally approach this from a different angle. That's why I'm a big fan of what you are building and how passionate you also are. I mean, we already talked for over an hour, but I feel like you could still talk for another 2 or 3 hours.
I could just keep going,
Yeah,
I could, just to mention that conversation about the indigenous people in the Amazon and empowerment and the importance of the Amazon, that's not just abstract conversation. There are working groups within Regen Network who are working on that. There is a validator that is running from Achuar territory in the Amazon, right? Wow. There are, there is a community that is reinventing carbon accounting from an indigenous Amazonian perspective. They're launching a credit class, hopefully by the end of the year. These are not abstract conversations. These are real conversations that happen in the real world at the intersection of blockchain and ecological health and cultural preservation and indigenous empowerment. It's not just a white paper anymore.
Yeah.
It was a white paper at one point, right? But now we're in the process of this emerging, and it takes a community. This is Regen Network is a fractal of Cosmos ecosystem, and in our little fractal of that, our corner of it, it's a community. There, this isn't just our business. There's validators, there's the foundation, there's other actors, there's other businesses who are leading that process and creating that opportunity. And so, my call to action for listeners is, if this stuff is exciting and you're passionate about it, there are thousands of ways to contribute. People can contribute as engineers, people can contribute as hodlers or stakers, people can contribute in governance, people can contribute in creating their own local manifestation of ecological accounting or carbon credits, people can contribute with content generation, people can contribute in so many different ways that I haven't even conceptualized, applications and assets and community groups, because really this vision for this to work, it takes a community, and it takes people saying, fuck it, what else am I going to do with my life other than try to create a better world, whether that's through new financial instruments or ecological accounting or content generation or an education, whatever it is. Like, the time is now. Like, we all got to roll up our sleeves and just choose to live meaningful and purposeful lives. Do what you're passionate about, like do what you're excited, contribute to something, learn, and gosh, it's such a fulfilling.
Yeah, I think that's also one common misconception that a lot of people have, especially people that joining the crypto industry, now after Bitcoin went to 60K, they're like, oh my God, I missed it. And then they're like, okay, what is the next coin that I can get rich so I can change my life and chase my passion, basically? Because actually on the side, I love doing music, or I love the environment, or I love this or that, right? But I think also that's where, like, my vision is for what I'm doing and with my channel and Cryptocito, is just to show people that crypto is so much more than just trying to get rich quick. It's so much more than that. And now actually we're in a time, that's probably the difference to 2017 and now, is that we actually have products with real world utility. We have real products. And sure, some products are just within the crypto space, like Uniswap, and there's other protocols. They're just trying to decentralize trading. But there's also real world stuff that's going on, and real world pilot projects where other people can also get involved from all over the world, right? I think we're at a time where crypto is at the verge of becoming mainstream. I hope that people are not too much panicking with all these, regulatory things that are going on right now, and still understand crypto and distributed networks at the core, because that's something nobody can stop, right? And everybody can contribute and become a part of, become a DAO member, right? Like, there's so many things. And I think you guys are definitely in a very good position with the environmental and carbon market. I'm really, really excited to track everything that you do. But let's wrap things up maybe with one or two community questions, because I have this habit that I ask before we do interviews what the community wants to know. And there came actually quite a few questions from the community. Maybe we can just pick one or two, because we already covered most of it. So there's a lot of questions that we already covered. For example, Kenyan Lens asked if you guys use satellite data to verify credits, right? I think we covered that. So just go back in the conversation and you'll find, I'll leave also timestamps below this video so everybody can just navigate back and forth. There's another question actually also from the same guy who asks, carbon credits may not be as intuitive to crypto community as DeFi. How will you bridge potential communication barrier to grow the network? I think that's a good question.
So the vision that I have for this, what's the back of my shirt say? Do I have the
for a thriving planet? Yes, powered by Cosmos.
All right, so So, you know, and what I'm about to say, these are not like feature promises or like hype. I just want to be able to share my thinking and my mind about this. So, you know, there's a long, and again, like another thing I want to say is like, yeah, 2021 is different from 2017 because there's real world use cases. We're digging in, there's things happening. There's, you know, like we transacted with Microsoft and Sotheby's and F2 Pool and all these things. Okay, that's all true. And I just want to be super clear to everybody. I believe that we're like another cycle away from this really being, you know, adopted at a mainstream level. Like this isn't going to happen overnight. Like we have our own, like I think of things in a 5 or 10 year time frame.
Yeah.
So I just want everybody to understand. What I'm going to talk about, I'm not trying to make promises about tomorrow. We have long road, a long committed pathway to build the technology and the social adoption and all of these things. So DeFi and carbon markets, how do they connect? Imagine a world in which you can liquidity provide, you can purchase an asset that is protecting the environment, and then LP that into a yield farming scheme that is giving you a, you know, an income that you can cycle back and do it again, and like create using the tools that DeFi has innovated as abstract magical internet money that can be grounded into real world impact and outcomes in such a way as to create the liquidity that the market needs for big corporates or other organizations that need to buy and retire those credits. These credits are essentially commodities, right? It just like wheat, like a carbon credit and there's different type of ecological assets that can be created and that we're working on innovating. But just like say a carbon credit, because that's where the market is right now. A carbon credit is like a unit of wheat, right? It's like a kilo of wheat. You buy, people can speculate on wheat and there's commodities trading markets and there's all this stuff. But at the end of the day, that wheat is there to be used, right? The wheat is there to be purchased and made into bread. All right, carbon credits are there to be purchased and retired in order to balance a carbon liability, right? That's what they're for. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be stock, there needs to be liquidity, there needs to be a set of carbon credits that a company or a government can come and pull to balance the carbon emissions that they weren't able to reduce through other means. And that's just like a basic, that's a basic part of that like emerging carbon economy. So what we want to do is democratize and create transparent markets around that so that people, individuals, and institutions can basically support bootstrapping that market in such a way as money is flowing to land stewards, to farmers, to indigenous people directly. They're changing the land in such a way as to sequester carbon into the forests or the soil. They're stewarding that, they're getting paid for it, right? And that carbon can then be LP'd into trading pairs that allow there to be market efficiency, price discovery, and real-time carbon offsetting, so that as carbon is emitted, and again, this all has to come along with as well reduction, efficiency, reducing the economic footprint. This isn't, you know, what we're doing can't replace society moving to renewable energies and reducing waste and just like sort of down. We have to kind of like come down from the crazy way things are working. Just, you know, but we also need to be able to offset the things that we have to, you know, there's our economy breathes in and our economy breathes out. Trees create oxygen and they pull down carbon dioxide, and then, you know, we turn trees into other things and, you know, carbon dioxide is reduced. There's a natural carbon cycle. Carbon markets are part of harmonizing our economy into that carbon cycle. carbon credits are a foundational unit of account and commodity within that larger carbon economy that's emerging. And there's a role for DeFi, liquidity provision, and the AMM and other instruments that allow us to create market efficiencies and liquidity in the marketplace. And that's where Regen Network is trying to go. Like, we want to create that decentralized, transparent, peer-driven marketplace so that those ecological assets can be created in integrity, traded in integrity, and retired, which is their end use. That's what they're good for. They're good for offsetting carbon emissions.
So it's not an either or, it's basically you're trying to merge both worlds and also find, take out the best elements, because in the end of the day, it's also about like game theory and financial structures and incentives, right? And I think that's also what the question is alluding to. You know, everybody's here to put their coins to work, to earn high yields, but I think it's not exclusive, it's rather like inclusive, and it's all part of it, right? Because the liquidity aspect of it also needs to be in a decentralized way, right? Somebody else was asking like, hey, when is Regen going to be listed on Binance? But I think that's not the point here. I think the point is that you're building this whole sequence of like adding value to the farmer, adding value to the environment, which brings a lot of side benefits with it natively, and then plus building the right environment on which you can also trade and get access and provide liquidity with carbon credits, but also with everything that comes with it. So I think that's a whole ecosystem that is really exciting. And yeah, maybe we can wrap things up with the last question here. What are the key partnerships that Regen needs to, that they need to forge to make the project successful? So in your opinion, what would you say, what is one or two partners that you think like, man, if we would onboard these guys, it would be really, really awesome?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I'm very focused on our role leading the crypto industry to climate action and a decentralized approach to climate finance and carbon markets. And so the partnerships I'm most excited and focused on that I hope will emerge are with exchanges like, who knows, FTX or Coinbase or Binance, Kraken. And the way that we're doing that is, like, we're one of the founding members of a blockchain infrastructure working group that includes F2 Pool, Stakefish, Blockchain for Climate, Creole and Offsetra, and other people who are working to RIN BTC, other large players, you know, who are saying, how do we build the cryptographic blockchain infrastructure for carbon accounting, offsetting, and financial mechanisms as a community, not as Regen or somebody else, not as like this group competing with that group, but as a community, how do we build that? And, you know, my hope through participating, and shout out to Daniel at Stakefish, he's been really like leading this. He's a great crypto Twitter follow. If people are interested, you know, he's been pulling us together. We've been building tools for them for carbon accounting, doing offsetting for F2 Pool a little bit, and just sort of like that pathway of creating industry working groups so that we can then partner to help offset exchanges, create automated offsetting, create like go offset DeFi collateral, so that we just have a natively carbon neutral or even carbon negative crypto industry. That's where I want to focus our attention, our partnerships, our sales, because if we do it as a community, and that puts DeFi and blockchain in the driver's seat where it should be in innovating financial and monetary systems to incorporate positive and negative externalities and create real value for society. You know, not just be speculative instruments, not just be a casino, but create, like, use the best elements of market mechanisms to transform society for the better. And so you know, if folks are listening, or if you want to ping out on crypto Twitter, if you want to ping, FTX and everybody else out there that, Sam's been taking leadership. There's all these folks, Regen Network, like we're OGs. We have the technical capability, the scientific capability, the land steward partnerships, the institutional relationships to support this industry taking the lead in climate finance.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think there was a lot of value. We almost we just crossed 1.5 hours actually, so that's a lot of value. I think for everybody also who are new to this, and I think there's a lot of people now that say, oh, that actually makes sense. Merging kind of like crypto with this whole energy waste narrative, and now seeing that decentralized distributed ledger technology can actually help to reinforce the climate change, like getting carbon neutral or even carbon negative, as you were saying. So yeah, I think it's really cool. I'll also link your Twitter and everything regarding to Regen Network, the Telegram and the Twitter site under this video, so everybody can follow up. And yeah, thanks so much for your time. And yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch also through Twitter, and we'll have you on another time for sure. And then we can talk about upgrades when the time is coming.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so yeah, we'll have a network upgrade before too long, and a new version of the Cosmos SDK 0.43 is about to be cut. Lots of awesome, exciting news, both in the Cosmos ecosystem and Regen. So happy, I generally, am on top of tweeting that kind of news out. And Cryptocito, I'm super grateful for your time, and just thanks for going over with the interview with all my excitement. And just excited, and thanks for creating great content for the community.
Thank you so much, man. We'll keep in touch.